What I usually do in the summer is I spend a few weeks talking about some of what I'm reading in the summer and just sharing some reflections on my reading. And that's what I'm going to be doing over the next number of weeks on a couple of different books. And the book I want to talk about today is, it's called Christianity After Religion: The End of Church and the Birth of a New Spiritual Awakening by Diana Butler Bass. And has anyone read that book? It's hard for me to see, but Butler Bass has actually written several books now over the last couple of years, talking about just the enormous change that's happening in the United States in particular, with the decline of institutional religion, and particularly focusing on more progressive religious communities and also other sort of non-Christian communities, and looking to see where the change is happening and where the action is at, and talking about what it means for those folks who are still part of church communities and institutional religion. She begins her book with this statement: I believe that the United States is caught up in the throes of a spiritual awakening, a period of sustained religious and political transformation during which our ways of seeing the world, understanding ourselves, and expressing faith are being, to borrow a phrase, born again. Indeed, the shifts around religion contribute to the anxiety, even as anxiety gives rise to new sorts of understandings of God and the spiritual life. Fear and confusion signal change. This transformation is what some hope will be a great turning toward a global community based on shared human connection, dedicated to the care of the planet, committed to justice and equality, that seeks to raise hundreds of millions from poverty, violence, and oppression. And I agree with that statement. I think change is in the wind. I think there are opportunities for absolutely wonderful things to happen for the planet, for people, for justice, and to lift the lives of many people in our country and around the world. And it's happening, and it's painful for many. And I think the signs of change are all around us. Last week I read a lot of blogs, as many of you know, and I read a blog by Christianity Today, which is the conservative Christian publication. And there was a post this past week which went like this: America's largest Protestant denomination released its annual self-assessment today, and most of its metrics went in one direction: down. In short, the nearly 16 million member Southern Baptist Convention gained 270 churches over the past year, but lost more than 105,000 members and 188,000 Sunday worshipers, according to its annual church profile. This marks its 6th straight year of membership decline. And then the head of the SBC described the decline in the number of baptisms, which is also going down rapidly, as heartbreaking. And if you're in the institutional church, it's heartbreaking. And I'm in the institutional church. But it's also hopeful. And particularly it's hopeful if the institutions that are struggling might finally realize that they need to rethink their anti-woman, anti-gay, and pro-militaristic policies that they associate with Christianity. And so as painful as it is, if it's forcing the institutional church to grapple with these issues, it's a good thing. And I might add that the Church of the Brethren has the same kind of problem, if on a much smaller scale. We were in Pennsylvania last week, and there was one nice summer warm day when we were sitting outside. We were sitting around at my family's house, and somehow we got to talking about gay marriage legalization in Minnesota, and particularly how the Northern Plains District of the Church of the Brethren might react to me doing a gay marriage, as I'm going to be doing this fall, at least one and possibly two, and maybe more. And for some reason or other, this prompted Ryan, son Ryan, to get on his computer and, while we were sitting there, look up the Church of the Brethren policy on homosexuality. And he read it out loud for us to listen to from the 1983 Human Sexuality paper, which is part of a larger paper on human sexuality. And it's been reaffirmed several times by the annual conference since then. Although it's kind of a dated paper, they've continued to reaffirm the policy. And I have to say, as I said to him, that listening to it being read out loud was shocking, jarring. And I had, just listening to it, had trouble with not only the theology that was expressed there, but in particular with what was being said about homosexuality. And that's a problem that we have in the Church of the Brethren. And it's a problem for a couple of reasons. Part of the problem is if you're someone like me, and you grow up in the Church of the Brethren, if you grew up in the family, you are more likely to put up with the bad parts like that in the hope that it will change over time. And you know, as I do, that there's lots of pieces of the Church of the Brethren and lots of programs in the Church of the Brethren and lots of things that they do that's very good. And so, you know, it's kind of your crazy uncle over there in the corner. It's your family. And it's, you know, you don't really enjoy the interaction, but it's family, and so you put up with it. And that's a problem. It's not a problem if it's your crazy uncle, because it is your crazy uncle and you need to put up with them.
Wait a minute, I'm over here.
Yes. But it's a problem in the denomination or in the institutional church because you put up with it. All the while you are in the midst of decline, and all the while people are unhappy and leaving, and you're losing leaders, and you're losing gay people. And it's also a problem if anyone who's young, like my son Ryan, who gets on our website and looks and reads that kind of thing and says, what's going on here? And if you are looking in from the outside and you are looking for a church or at a church, and GLBT equality is important to you, then you're more likely to go somewhere else. And it's a problem. And the inability to be or to get on the right side of the movement for equality for all, or the inability to realize and to get on the right side of the fact that we are in the midst of climate change and we need to change big time the way we live. I mean, these, for anyone who's aware in our world, these are two of the defining issues of our day. And to be not there means that churches and denominations will continue to decline in numbers and have less to say to people about these issues, and particularly to anyone who's under the age of 40. And that's disconcerting if you are in the institutional church to see this happening. But, as Butler Bass says, we are in this period of discontent. And discontent, she says, and I think as the Serenity Prayer says, is the beginning of change. Only by noticing what is wrong, she says, seeing the systems and structures that do not foster health and happiness, can we ever make things different. If people were satisfied, there would be no reason to reach for more, no motivation for creativity and innovation. Discontent is one short step from the longing for a better life, a better society, and a better world. And longing is another short step from doing something about what is wrong. Indeed, restlessness possesses a spiritual quality. Blessed are the poor in spirit, said Jesus, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And that discontent is what is behind what is the most popular phrase that is out there these days for people when they are talking about where they are in their faith journey. I am spiritual, but I am not religious. And many, many people use that to describe their faith commitment. I cannot tell you how many times I have heard that statement said. And I can honestly say that I have found myself saying it a few times as well. I am spiritual, but I am not religious. Why is that? Well, I'm also one of those who's a little bit uncomfortable with that phrase. And, part of it, I have to confess, is self-serving because I'm part of a religious institution. When somebody says they're spiritual but not religious, I take it personally. What do you mean you're spiritual, not religious? Part of it is because religion is not a bad word. And I believe that we are fundamentally religious people. And I think we are in a part of our life together where it's gotten a bad rap. And I think eventually it will turn. But for now, that's the way it is. But I'm also a little uncomfortable with that phrase, spiritual, not religious, because too often I have seen people use that phrase who are off doing their own thing spiritually, and they have no connection whatsoever on a regular basis with any kind of community. And I think that's a problem. In fact, I have two problems with that. And one is that when that happens, I think that we are cutting off what is probably the most significant aspect of our spiritual life, which is being part of a community of people. Making and keeping commitments to people is an enormous aspect of spiritual life and spiritual growth. Caring for and being cared for cared for and by members of a community is an enormous part of spiritual life and growth. Working on emotional health intentionally as part of a community of people who have a range of personalities and experiences. And I think often of Dennis Johnson, God rest his soul, who was a member of our community for many years, and who would walk in here and sit down and out of nowhere would just start to blurt out things. And sometimes the language was salty. And sometimes it honestly made me squirm. And yet, having someone like Dennis as part of our community is just absolutely a gift. Because he has had this unique perspective. And when you have folks who have this range of differences and different personalities, and you are part of that kind of a community, then you are stretched to grow. And you learn things about yourself, and you learn things about other people that you would not learn otherwise. And when we are off on our own personal journey doing spiritual, and everyone needs to be on their own personal journey. There's no substitute for the inner work that we do by ourselves. But when we are not part of communities together working on it, then we are missing probably the most challenging and fruitful part of the spiritual journey, and that's being together in a community and being part of a community. And the second problem I have is that being off on our own is that, you know that phrase, divide and conquer? We have institutional forces of power, of big corporations and all kinds of institutional forces out there who love nothing better than having us all separated out into our own individual lives, because we have no power then to affect change. And it is only when we are part of communities, it is only when we are working together that we, pulling our resources and our knowledge and learning skills together, that we then have power and we have resources to be able to stand up to the institutional forces that are working for the ill health of our society and work to bring about change. And it's very difficult to do that, if not impossible to do that, when we are on our own. We've got to be together. And so when I hear that phrase, spiritual but not religious, I have to ask the question, what does that mean? Because if it means that I'm just out there doing my own thing, then I think it's a little troubling. But it doesn't have to mean that. And Bass talks in the book about the fact that for many people, it means something more than that. It means connection. It means being with people, but it means doing it in a different way. One of the interesting parts of her book is that she spends most of her time in faith communities. I think she comes out of a Presbyterian background, and she teaches in a seminary, but she does a lot of workshops with institutional church people, and especially she does workshops with pastors and denominational leaders and committed members of churches. And she does an exercise, she says, all the time, where she puts on a whiteboard, or whatever she's got to write on, 2 terms: spirituality and religion, and asks people to define the terms. And in the religious category, she typically gets institution, organization, rules, order, dogma, authority, beliefs, structure, building, boundaries, certainty. In the spiritual, she gets experience, connection, transcendence, intuition, prayer and meditation, nature, energy, wisdom, inner life, inclusiveness, and doubt. And what she finds interesting, she says in the book about this, is that she's doing these workshops with clergy and church members and denominational leaders who have a commitment to the institutional church, but, quote, no matter how hard they try, they find it difficult to get very excited about religion. They have essentially substituted the word religion for institutional religion and spirituality for a lively faith. So even among religious people, religion is a problematic word. And that, she says, is where we are. And at its best, she says, spirituality represents an important stage of awakening. That we are at an important stage of awakening. We are, she says, in the midst of searching for new gods. As the old gods and the institutions that preached and preserved and protected them are losing credibility. And people are searching for new ways to be connected and to grow spiritually and to affect change. And there's a challenge for faith communities like ours and others to be a part of that movement and to choose to embrace the uncertainty, because there's just uncertainty. It's full of uncertainty. And there's no way to see clearly what the outcome is going to be and what new directions will hold and take and reform into different kinds of organizations and what we're going to have to let go of in our denominations and in our churches. in order to move forward. And so there's a challenge there to step into the midst of that uncertainty and to ride the wave and to go with the flow, and still in the midst of that to be what we can be, which is a community, and to do the things that communities can do, which is to be together, to listen together, to talk together, to learn from each other, to serve, to train and learn, teach each other, and then to be a force for effective change by working together with other communities so that we can bring about the kind of change we want in the world. And, for people who are around here, I think I'm speaking to the choir. We know this, and that's part of why we are here. And I talk often about, being a place where we can create a safe space. And the safe space part is the part where we learn how to listen to each other and talk to each other and learn from each other in ways that are not destructive, in ways that are respectful, in ways that always have the very best for the other person, even if we have differences with them. We always want the very best for them, and so we will treat them with respect and listen to them, even if we have differences. And that's the safe space part. If there's not a safe space, then there's no growth. And so we work on, the emotional intelligence part and learning how to grow up individually so that we can learn from each other and deal with people we disagree with. And that's one of the very most important things that happens in a church. It is. So we want to create this safe space so that then people can come in and figure out and work on their spiritual path. And so that we can support each other in that and learn from each other and do it together and be a community together. And so I think, we know, and that doesn't mean we still don't have things to work on. We do, but we know we're there and we're kind of in the midst of that, and most of the people who come into our community are coming with that kind of perspective. They're often leaving behind something that was dissatisfying or wasn't working and looking for something new, and they're here to work together as part of our community. So for the next few weeks, I'm going to be sharing some more reflections from this book on what that means for us as a community and for our institutional churches, and for what are some of the directions that churches that are working on this are going, and what can we learn from them as well. So thank you for listening today. Amen.